Actually fronts the cameras for now. We rely on his Twitter feed, and he's been fairly active on that in the last 30 minutes. That first tweet just coming about 3:15 Sydney time.
Yeah, as soon as he addresses that crowd in Chicago where they're live. For now, though, Dr. Adam Lockyer, who's the lecturer in US politics and foreign policy at the University of Sydney's US Studies Centre, joining us in studio. Warm welcome to you. 4 more years of the same. FT's headline today was the president to put the can-do spirit back in the US. It seems awfully quick a result. Are you surprised at the speed of it?
Not really. I mean, I think the polls are always showing that Mitt Romney and Obama were neck and neck in the popular vote. So the overall vote was always going to be a very close one and still looking that way. But when you break it down to the electoral college system, so this strange way that Americans elect their presidents, Obama was always the favourite. He always had the inside running to the presidency.
Just explain that in a bit more detail, because Donald Trump has been active on Twitter this afternoon. He's saying it's a sham, it's a travesty, but he made the point that Obama lost the popular vote, but he won the election.
That's right. So the way that the United States elects their president is through breaking it down by state. So the larger the state, the more electoral college votes they get. So the more points they get towards a presidency. So you may actually win the popular vote. So you might win more than 50% of the popular vote. But if you don't win the big states in the right combination, you still can't get to this magic number, which is 270, which is half the electoral college votes.
And on that front, it looks like he's kind of blown that out of the water.
That's right. So it looks as though Obama is now going to easily go past the 270 mark, and he's probably going to end up at something in the order of 332 electoral college votes.
When rubber hits the road, the next mountain to climb is who controls the House, who controls the Senate. It looks, if reports are right, as if coming out of this election, it's more divided than it was going into it.
That's true to a point. So we have a few of the extreme Tea Partiers that have failed to be elected into the Senate. So it looks as though the Democrats are going to keep control of the Senate, but they're not going to have what's called the supermajority. So they need 60 of the 100 senatorial seats in order to break down what's a filibuster. And a filibuster is a virtual veto that any senator has over any piece of legislation.
Any doubts about the result? We've got the possibility of legal challenges. Carson was reading earlier and telling me today about these 10,000 armies of lawyers just standing by waiting for this result.
Yes, and they're standing ready in the key states too, which are going to be very close. So
like
Florida,
Ohio.
yes, and Virginia, they're all ready to go. So we'll wait and see what happens there, but it looks as though these states are leaning towards Obama, but they're all still up in the air. Virginia is still being painted as red, although we're still waiting for the key DC suburbs. So there's suburbs in Virginia, the virtual DC suburbs, and they're very heavily Democrat. So we might see a late Obama comeback in Virginia.
What of the biggest test of all now, which is the market's concern, because incidentally you've seen the S&P 500 futures sold off on this, which is perhaps no surprise. US dollar weaker, gold higher, so kind of the story's capped there. But you know, as far as the implications for the fiscal cliff, how are we heading there? I mean, what progress has been made to date?
Yes, so I think that Obama probably has a strong incentive now to play hardball when it comes to fiscal cliff. So on the 1st of January, this is when the Bush-era tax cuts are supposed to expire and sequestration is supposed to kick in. So he's going to be dealing with the same Congress that is in place now. So they don't change over to the new congressman until the 3rd of January. So he's going to be dealing with outgoing the Congress. So it's going to see sort of what their incentive structure is, whether or not it's in their incentive just to, well, cooperate with the president, or is it in their interest to say, well, I came into government saying I was never going to raise taxes, and I'm never going to raise taxes, and be able to return to their electorate saying I did what I came to do.
Yeah. How would you judge in terms of the extent of the division in Congress? Now, we remember, and we followed very closely, it was one of the biggest market days probably we can remember in the last few years, when S&P downgraded the United States, and it was on the back of all the infighting over the raising of the debt ceiling. So we've got a similar situation again in the House. Are they more divided, less divided than they were back then? Or how do we judge that one?
Yeah, so this strategy was a deliberate strategy by the Republicans, particularly in the Senate, to block everything that was going to come forward. So their intention was to make Obama a one-term president. The fact now that he's now running his second term, maybe that strategy is no longer relevant, and perhaps they'll be more likely to cooperate and put the country before politics. But that's yet to be seen.
George Soros has just tweeted on that very note saying he's delighted with the decision today and hopefully Republicans will make better partners to avoid this fiscal cliff. So maybe even a reference to what you're talking about there. There you go.
Another tweet, Donald Trump, you're fired, which can just
He's
go
had a
by the
meltdown
by.
on Twitter. Everyone's I think we'll see people talking about that after today anyway.
Yeah, on the sidelines of all of this. Let's ponder markets for a moment. We're going to come back and discuss with you, of course, in more detail. But Noel Yates is from Macquarie Private Wealth. Noel, we hit a 4-day high, which is kind of some cause for hoopla, which is intriguing, given the S&P 500 futures are going the other direction. Explain away if you could.
Oh, it is intriguing, Carson, but volumes today incredibly light. I wouldn't read too much into it. What was really interesting, at 3:10, I think, as the channel started to call Mr Obama's victory, the market did jump about 10 points in a couple of seconds, so it goes to show that sentiment in Australia was probably a little bit more pro-Obama than Mr Romney. I think out of this, I think what most people are quite relieved about is just the end of uncertainty, and I think that's really what you'll read into most markets. Whether the US markets open as low as the futures are at the moment, I think we could wait and see what happens there. May not be quite as low as we think.
Yeah, because you've seen the US dollar dive. In broad terms, we can expect that to be positive for markets, I guess, couldn't we?
Yeah, broadly, but I think we'll probably take our lead out of the US for the next day or so. Pretty well every other piece of news in the world will go to one side while this is digested and probably fully absorbed, and that should only be a couple of days. I think then people will actually look at the issues that you've just spoken about. How will President Obama actually deal with some of the issues? How will the Congress behave? All of those things. The US has some very real issues, and clearly there's some great messages out of the US electorate for their elected officials, and hopefully they take them on board while the rest of the world watches with stunned amazement.
Noel, the talk now turns to fiscal cliff. What do you say in response when clients ask you what that's going to mean for, for sectors in play? Do they still sit on the sidelines, as you've said at the top of the show? Are volumes going to continue just to fall off the cliff?
I just love the way our investors go from crisis to crisis to crisis to crisis. And the election was a crisis. The RBA on Tuesday was a crisis. The Melbourne Cup was a crisis. Now we look at
come on.
cliff.
You calling it that? We never called it that.
I'll quote you on that one, Carson. I think what we'll see is very similar to what has happened in Europe. I think what we'll see is some form of muddled through, given that we've got this re-elected position. We've got, as Adam was speaking about, you've got carryover electors. You've got all of this transition period in the US, and I think what you'll see is some form of muddled through on policy, both reduction on some debt minimisation procedures, but also probably some change to the tax cuts as well. So I think you'll find a very compromised position going through. That's what we're expecting to see, that's what we're hoping to see, and we think that's probably not a bad outcome. Either of the two extreme outcomes is probably neither good for markets nor for the economy. So we're expecting to see some compromise, whether that is with the current elected officials or over the next 12 months.
So is it all offshore, everything kind of elsewhere affecting what we're doing here in Australia? Is there any distractions locally?
Quite a few distractions today with CBA's result, with Harvey Norman, with Dow, Downer EDI and a few others. But really the big story today is all about the US elections. I guarantee if you went to every dealing room in Australia, the TVs were pretty well on. People are looking at it, and that's where our clients' heads are at as well. People kind of caught up in the psephology of all of this as well. There's all of that wonderful excitement about counting numbers, about a very rare event in political terms. But that really is the drumbeat for this current period. The next major event actually is Thursday, and that's the China Congress, and that's one that probably has more impact on Australia, strangely enough, actually in real terms.
It's a rare event, though. You've got to go all the way back to Reagan in '84 when he won re-election at 7.2% unemployment. In other words, aside from that rare re-election, you've got to go all the way back to World War II to actually get the incumbent win through with such a high level of unemployment.
Yeah, I think very unusual, but I think probably US electors probably understand the conditions in which Mr Obama came into office. Wasn't really a clear run for him in many ways, so I think there's probably a bit of tolerance there. And perhaps they just didn't feel ready to go back to another Republican quite so soon after the Bush years. Interestingly, Mr Obama was also only the second Democrat to be elected or re-elected, I think, in the last 100 years, or since World War II anyway. So Bill Clinton being the other one, of course. And so it's a very rare event for a Democrat to get re-elected, but possibly the gap between Mr Bush and Mr Romney not quite as long as perhaps the electors want.
Maybe Adam Lockyer, who's with us still in studio from the United States Studies Centre, University of Sydney. I've got to remember the whole title. Adam, what do you think of that Noel's just been talking about?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think that a lot of the electorate out there thought that Obama probably deserved a second go, that he probably didn't do a bad job. And so although America is still in pain economically, I think they think that America is at least starting to show signs of recovery, and now is probably not the time to change leadership.
So many of those household metrics, like house prices, like the ability to go out and spend, we are seeing a pickup. I mean, it may not be a takeoff story, but I mean, and we might be paring back growth for the US, but it's still growing. It's not in a recession like Europe. So do you think the hip pocket factor has played a part of this today?
Yeah, so I think corporate America has largely recovered off the GFC, and we're still waiting for that recovery to make its way into the real economy. So we're still waiting for job figures to really pick up. Like we were saying, unemployment figures are still at 7.9%, and growth is still pretty low by historical standards.
Do those debates have any part in this? When you reflect those three landmark events, it seemed to be split. Romney victorious #1, and then Obama got some momentum. What was the conclusion on that?
So I think it's probably a closer result than it would have been without the debate. So Romney did a very good job in the first debate in particular to cast himself as a more moderate candidate.
Does that really, I mean, they come so late in the piece though, really. I think as Australians we forget people are voting even kind of long before those debates start happening, right?
Well, they start,
some of them,
yeah, so the pre-polling, that's after the debates normally in most states. But I think that most undecided voters, they're the people at the queue that don't make up their mind on what they're going to eat until they get to the front of the queue. These are the last minute voters. And so even though the debates come late, they're really targeting at the non-decided.
Dr. Lockyer, we're going to have to leave it there because unfortunately normal programming is back in play, top of the hour. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your insights. Adam Lockyer there from the US Studies Centre. I want to thank Noel Yates as well across the Macquarie Private Wealth for standing on by patiently. Right.
We just take a quick break, but we will be back, and we've got plenty more analysis on what it meant for markets. We've just seen quite a rally here in Australia this afternoon. We're sitting on 0.7%. We'll wrap it up on the other side of this.